Putting on my top hat, tying up my white tie, brushing up my tail.
Welcome to Hatcast,
the podcast about hats.
I'm Charles Berman.
And I'm Carl Bernhardson.
And we're here to talk about hats.
Yes.
And do we have a program for you?
I am excited about every single part of it. I'm always excited about every part of Hatcast, but I'm particularly excited about today because it's a hat that has been near and dear to my heart that we will be discussing when we finally reveal what hat it is we will be talking about.
Yes, but first we always have to begin the program by saying hello.
Hello.
Hello. And we should cover any old business that we have.
Did we have old business?
We did have one piece.
Oh, correspondence from our listeners?
We had a piece of correspondence from a listener correcting an inaccuracy.
Oh.
This is in reference to a few episodes ago, and we should say, audience, that all your correspondence is going to be at a little bit of a delay because we are recording a few weeks ahead at the moment of when it's being put online.
Right. Hopefully this will even out eventually.
Yeah.
But
this is from a few weeks ago when you said that even paper clips could be a symbol. And I said paper clips were a symbol of anti-Donald Trump.
Right.
Apparently that's not quite correct. Paper clips are not a symbol, safety pins, and it's not specifically anti-Trump. It's to signal to folks that you are a safe person to approach for help navigating sexism, racism, anti-trans sentiment, etc.
Oh, okay.
So
paper clips aren't a thing yet.
They
open for interpretation.
are objects.
Right. They are not yet a thing which has come to symbolize another thing or concept.
I think in the only sense that they might is of overly obsequious or officious computer help programs.
Yes. I do remember that wonderful little paperclip man.
Yes.
Can I help you with that?
It looks like you're writing a letter.
No, it's not a letter.
You seem to have begun a list. Would you like to follow one with two? But no, that's a safety pin.
Okay. Well, thank you, dear listeners, for the correction.
Also a small metal object.
Yes. Even we make mistakes, as infrequently as that happens.
But I think making this program is not one of them.
No.
All right, let's move on to what hats we're wearing today.
I'm very excited about the hat that you were wearing today. So we're going to start with my hat because it's less interesting. It's continued to be winter here.
Yes.
In upstate New York.
March has come in like a lion, and we've reached mid-March like a lamb with a mane and fangs.
Yeah, yeah. It has not slowed down yet. We've had a couple of snowstorms recently. So today, this morning, I just reached for a knit cap.
Yes.
Which I wore while I was shoveling.
Which I think they sometimes call a watch cap.
A watch cap, yep.
Yeah. It's the kind with the fold at the bottom, which I do like.
Yep, I like that. Although, you don't have to fold it at the bottom, although it would be ridiculously large and cover my eyes if I didn't fold it at the bottom. It's a wonderful dark red.
Burgundy.
Yeah. And it's made of acrylic, which is a wonder material.
It truly is.
I just painted my house recently, and that was acrylic too.
You could paint or sweaters, or hats,
or transparent plastic sheets. It can really be anything.
Truly, we live in an age of wonders.
It is a wonderful age.
A truly functional hat.
It is, and one day we'll have to get to doing a whole episode on this hat.
I think before long, I would imagine.
Because it's fantastic. I just recently had a haircut. They cut it too short. My head's been cold, and
it's a good haircut. I thought it was intentional.
Oh, it doesn't look bad. It's just shorter than I meant for it to be, with it still being cool weather.
Very cold out. Yeah. My hat today. You said even that it might be difficult to describe.
I don't know what this is. I don't know what to call it. I could name the parts that it is made up of. But it's got a lot going on now, especially now that I see the lining.
Yes,
it has even more going on.
Now it's a wool tweed. I would call it a walking hat, but the kind of walking hat which you'll see these from time to time with leather patches on the side that cover the whole sides of the hat.
Let's start off by just describing the shape of it. It has a brim that goes all around.
Yes.
It has a crushable crown with a
crease.
dent in the top. A very pronounced crease at the top, too. It seems like it's meant to be folded in on itself.
Yeah, which you can.
And yes, it is made of tweed, but with big leather patches. Kind of like the jackets you imagine a professor wearing if you imagined a caricature of a professor, and then turn that jacket into a hat.
Yes. Imagine the crown is made of 3 panels. The center panel is the same tweed as the brim, and the 2 side panels are tan leather.
Yes.
And then inside we've got a pretty loud, silkish lining. Yeah, with paisley.
Gold, red, blue, olive green paisley.
Yes.
Medallions. It's got a lot going on.
I'm very happy to have this hat.
Where did it come from? Where did you find this?
It came at somewhere I went had a flea market.
Okay.
And there were some used hats for sale.
Huh.
And I bought this, and I'm pretty happy to own it.
It looks, for such a strange hat, it looks very good.
Well, thank you.
It's very, very wearable.
I sort of picture it as the hat of a professor and or a country squire.
Yes.
And those two wardrobes conceptually overlap a certain degree, I think.
They do.
Yeah.
You could have a number of country squires who ended up being a professor, or having a brother who ended up being a professor.
Yeah.
And those wardrobes also overlap with your wardrobe, Charles.
Oh, thank you.
So it works all around.
Thank you. Perhaps I'll wear this hat more. I wonder now, and if you're listening and you know the answer, please let us know. I wonder if there's a particular name for this kind of, I would call it maybe a walking hat, but that has the leather patches on the side.
Yeah, I would be very curious to find that out. So yeah, dear listeners, please let us know.
And I believe this is real leather. Sometimes you can only tell if it's real leather when it gets a scratch, unfortunately, but it has one.
It has a scratch, and it looks like the way that real leather scratches, as opposed to the way that fake leather kind of tears, right?
Yeah.
Real leather will scratch, and you can sort of not rub it away completely, but you can polish it down a little bit with your finger. So that sort of feels like that.
But it's very minor, and I don't think it detracts from the hat.
Oh, no. I mean, it's a hat that's been worn.
Yes.
So.
Well, let's get to the hat of today. A hat that has been worn, but isn't worn very much anymore.
No, you're not going to see it anywhere outside of a costume drama or historical reenactors, but it is still a pretty fantastic hat. It's a variant on a very simple hat, right? It's a variant on just the big brimmed hat with a crown.
Right, a variant on a similar hat to the wide awake that we discussed earlier, but not necessarily napless.
No.
We're talking about what sometimes is called the 3-cornered hat.
My hat, it has 3 corners.
3 corners has this particular hat. Now, if you actually look into it, this hat was evidently not called a tricorne or a 3-cornered hat until the mid-1800s, when it was not really worn anymore.
Yeah, it was sort of out of fashion at that point.
At the time that it was common, it was called a cocked hat.
Okay, because you folded the sides over, right?
Yes, the 3 corners are cocked up, and it was known as a cocked hat. And this is the hat that was, I think, de rigueur for many people in many echelons of society through most of the 18th century.
Yes. It was, I mean, you saw it in varying degrees of, finish and elaborateness, but it was the same style of hat worn across the entire social ladder, right?
Yes, in Europe and
for
the United States or American and then United States colonies.
Right. For a very long time. Too. Did it have like a 100-year run?
Yes.
I mean, that beats out the bowler, beats out top hat, beats out any of those sort of ubiquitous hats that you think of. When did it make its first appearance?
It appeared as the evolution of the broad-brimmed round hat used by Spanish soldiers in Flanders during the 17th century. By pledging or binding the brims, a triangular shape was obtained. This shape was favored by Spanish soldiers, as when standing at arms, their muskets could be held by their shoulders, right or left, without hitting the hat brim.
Okay. So did it start... You see that sort of wide-brimmed military hat with one side sort of tied up. And I guess that was probably where it started,
and
to
then
keep
all
the
three
musket
quarters,
from
yes.
hitting it.
And it indicates that it became ubiquitous by the mid-late 18th century. Mm-hmm. Now, we got a book here from 1848, An Illustrated History of the Hat by John Nicholas Jenin.
What a book.
Oh, yes. 1848, it says, the cocked hat, which is the hat that we're talking about, it has an illustration of several different varieties of it. And you can see here that it can be plain,
right,
black hat, or it can be decorated very ostentatiously.
Yeah, you can have fringe, you can have ruffles, you can have really anything you can sew onto the hat. Someone sewed onto this hat at some point.
And I think, now, if you imagine this, you think of this as being distantly far afield from anything you would see. But it really is a plain, broad-brimmed hat with the brim pinned up.
Right.
And this is the hat that I imagine, I haven't seen all the evidence, that I imagine both Washington and Lord North would have been wearing perhaps at the same time.
Right.
On different sides of the sea. This would have been the hat that Dr. Johnson wore, that Stern wore, that Fielding wore. All your favorite 18th century people
would
have probably worn this hat. This was the kind of hat. It says here in 1848, the cocked hat has been in vogue from the time of its first introduction into England to the present day. There certainly was never a more uncouth or unbecoming covering worn upon the head of man. But it is invested with a peculiar charm for an American or an Englishman. It is a symbol with the English for everything that is respectable, dignified, and conservative. It seems to be a perpetual remembrance to an Englishman of the good old times when George III was king, and the nobility and squirearchy.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
And the nobility and squirearchy placed the cocked hat upon the heads of their coachmen to give those important personages an appearance of ancient grandeur, as though they were heirlooms that had been inherited from a remote ancestry. To the American, the cocked hat brings patriotic recollections of revolutionary times. For Washington and all the generals of the Revolution wore cocked hats. The French Revolution committed dreadful havoc among the cocked hats, and, in fact, completely destroyed the entire race in that country. The Emperor Paul of Russia showed his detestation of French republicanism by paying great respect to the cocked hat. So great was his veneration for this antique head covering that he made a law forbidding any of his subjects to wear a round hat on pain of being knouted and sent to Siberia. What is that? Knouted?
I don't know what knouted is. Probably something bad. Oh, yep.
A knout is a heavy scourge-like multiple whip, usually made of a bunch of rawhide thongs attached to a long handle, sometimes with metal wire or hooks, so you don't want to be knouted.
No, you want to wear this hat so you're not hit and then sent to Siberia.
I mean, you could be in Siberia in the summer sitting by the shore of Lake Baikal, and it could be quite nice.
Right, but it's not going to stay nice.
No. Not if you're being knouted, and probably not if you're being imprisoned there by Emperor Paul for wearing a round hat. And I've actually seen an old photograph from the 1850s or 60s of a 90-year-old former Revolutionary soldier dressed in... Yes.
That's the thing. It hung on, just like any of these hats, right? They do hang on past their prime. You would have seen some older people wearing them in the 1850s. Very unfashionably.
And it says here they're putting them on their footmen.
Right. To make them look old-fashioned.
Right, and probably the footman doesn't wear that hat as his day-to-day headwear.
Right.
But you still see it from time to time. Just as I think probably there are fancy hotels where you see people in top hats.
Right. You're not going to usually see someone in a top hat, but when you want to give the appearance that you've been around forever, you wear the last century's hat.
And I think by analogy, and no analogy is perfect, but I think there are people today for whom the top hat is a symbol of everything that is respectable, dignified, and conservative.
Right.
Nowadays, the cocked hat, though, is just a symbol of everything that is 18th century or very old.
Yes. Well, because it was so ubiquitous in the 18th century, if you want to transport yourself to the 18th century with no other costume items, but to have your audience think, oh, it's the 18th century, put on a three-cornered hat.
Yes, and I actually sort of like them, especially now the top picture. If you go to Wikipedia at the present time, is a pretty modest and unostentatious one, worn with a very ostentatious yellow coat. And the 18th century is wonderful for its ostentatious coats.
The idea that everyone was just walking around wearing black coats is completely off. You had...
And some people were.
Some people were. And it depends on where you were. If you were in a city, yes, you'd be wearing black or gray or dark blue, that kind of thing. But there were some wonderfully strange colors. A lot of them sort of earth tones. And you would even find the hats in those colors. You know, it's...
I got to wear a sort of jacquard long red coat when I was in a play of Amadeus, and I played Salieri.
Oh, really? Oh, that must have been fun.
That was wonderful. I'm a little bit sad that the styles of the 18th century are not in vogue anymore.
Well, let's bring them back.
We could. Certainly could.
Because the hat, I mean, you put the hat on, and it's true. You do immediately feel dignified and well-dressed. And it is a silly hat. It's a hat that's had its function taken away, right? You've removed the useful part of the hat.
Right.
And now it just sits on your head and says, I am a hat.
Yeah. And it said that the U.S. president, Washington wore one, Adams wore one. It said that up through James Monroe,
okay,
they all wore them. And James Monroe's nickname in the United States was our last cocked hat.
Really?
Because he was wearing them past when they were fashionable at all.
Right, because the top hat had come into
fashion,
at that point. Yep.
But Monroe was an old-fashioned sort of person, and he still wore the full dress of the 18th century, and he was the last cocked hat. And at that time, it was a sign of dignity. Now it just it doesn't have those strands of memory have gone, and it's sort of a picture out of an old book for most people, I think.
Or a costume drama movie.
Right? Yeah, or for certain ceremonial purposes.
Or I guess people do associate them with pirates too, who are from the 18th century. But...
Well, yeah, 18th century pirates. That's right. I used to have one, and it was actually quite well made. It was stiff black felt.
Yeah, I had a nice one too.
Yeah, with a yellow fringe on it, and it was. I believe I got it at Colonial Williamsburg or something like that.
That's where I got mine.
Oh, excellent!
I think it's where every young man gets his first
cocked hat. Yes. But I didn't really get to wear it that much.
Oh no, I would wear it a lot as a boy.
I would wear it, but I mean, once I was adult, you don't have
no more occasion to. Yeah, you're when you're not sort of dressing up for fun all the time. You don't have. You can't wear it to work. You can't. People would ask questions on the bus. And it's probably as far as of all the hats that we've talked about so far, this is the one that would get you the most questions if you were to wear it out and about. Barring like the balaclava at a bank.
Yes, you would immediately be taken for you are from the 18th century. You are dressing like you're from the 18th century. You are trying to bring back the 18th century hat for some reason. Maybe you are going to a costume event or something, but it's very few people's day-to-day wear.
Yeah.
There is a section here where it is worn in some contexts. Of course, reenactors, people at Colonial Williamsburg, people who have bought a souvenir and want to show off their souvenir. Tricorne survive today as part of the traditional dress of the Chelsea pensioners in the UK and the Old Guard Fife and Drum Corps of the United States Army. And that's another use. Many Fife and Drum Corps, I think, will wear them. The distinctive hat of the Spanish Guardia Civil, called the Tricorneo in Spanish, originates from the tricorne. In the UK, a black feathered tricorne is part of the ceremonial dress of most Lord Mayors. At the annual Lord Mayor's show in November, the newly elected Lord Mayor of the City of London can usually be seen enthusiastically waving his tricorne at the crowds. And they have a tricorne here worn by a member of the Dutch court. He has a very large one. Of course, it's ceremonial.
Right.
It's not modest the way some are.
Well, and they varied over time with how modest or immodest they were.
Yes. I think the smaller ones look better to me.
Oh, they definitely do. They look much more like a day-to-day hat that you could wear. But the larger ones are impressive. And there's more room for things like this massive gold trim and these tassels that that you see.
Yes, and they have a large list here of mostly ceremonial uses. There is a reference here to how in 1981 the milliner John Boyd made the famous pink tricorne hat for Diana, Princess of Wales. This style became known as the Lady Di design and was copied worldwide. So in women's hats, it did have
A little bit of a
a
resurgence.
comeback, and you can see from old illustrations, Catherine the Great is wearing them.
Oh, but plenty of women wore them too.
Yeah,
wasn't
it was
just
a
a
men's
men's
and
hat.
women's hat, certainly, because it was initially military style, and military styles tend to
Be adopted
be
by everyone.
pretty broadly.
Yep.
It's only really in the 19th century that you even hear people start calling it a cocked hat, because in the 18th century,
It was just your hat.
it was just a hat.
You didn't even need a name to describe it because everybody was wearing
A hat. Yes.
It was just you might describe what was particular about that hat. Whether it had feathers attached to it or a bow or some kind of trim. But yeah, a hat was a hat, and a hat had three corners.
Here's a reference in 1806 to a very remarkable character was humpbacked, wore a cocked hat with the flaps all down and an old brown coat, etc.
So that even just a hat that has a big floppy brim was called a cocked hat with the flaps all down, right?
I get the impression that it used to be a cocked hat and the stitches came out that were holding the... Yeah. But this brings to mind something that... It's a concept that's almost hard to explain in our modern milieu. But I think that it's only the idea of wearing clothes from a previous time intentionally outside of a costume is almost very much a product of our current time.
And is that because we just have access to more images of what clothing was like in a previous time that we can even think of doing that?
To a certain extent. I mean, very broadly, yes. For instance, the people that made the medieval mystery plays about Christ assumed Christ wore the clothes of medieval Europe. Yeah.
Even you look at all so many paintings done in the Renaissance, and you see the apostles wearing Renaissance clothing. You know, it's
yeah, and even what little we know about the designs of costumes in Shakespeare, there are nods at Roman costume, but still wearing a lot of
Elizabethan clothes. Yeah.
But even beyond that, even up to the 1920s or so, you would wear the clothes you had, and when they wore out, or you wanted more clothes, you would get new clothes, and they would be made as clothes were made.
Right.
When you needed a hat, you would go to the hat store, and you would see the kind of hats that are being made now, and you would pick one out.
You'd get the available hat.
But I think that now the availability of so many styles of clothing, together with the record of the past, has made it possible to choose different time periods with a bit more impunity.
That is an interesting thing. I'm not... It's something that I've thought about before, right? How this sort of visual record, and I guess just more clothing being available to us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, unless you were fabulously wealthy, you didn't have many clothing options. You probably were wearing the same thing.
And you may have, but now I think it's more common to encounter an eccentric person dressed in the style of 70 years ago than 70 years ago it would have been to encounter an eccentric person dressed in the style of 70 years before.
Right. Now, we're not running into people all over the place dressed like it's 70 years ago. But I guess it is more frequent than almost never.
Right, yeah.
Although, like that excerpt, like the excerpt from that book that we just read, people were dressing their footmen up in the costume of 70 years ago to suggest that they had
yes.
footmen for 70 years, not the same footmen, but that they've been with money long enough to have antiquated style for their servants.
I was just reading Boswell's Life of Johnson. This was part of what put me in mind of the 18th century, and they're talking to an older fellow who's still wearing lace on his cuffs, and Mrs. Thrale tells him people just aren't wearing the lace cuffs anymore, and they sort of rib him a little bit for being out of style. And I don't think that anyone thought there's a possibility that I'm just still wearing the previous fashion as a fashion statement because I prefer it.
Right. It was just you're out of date. Although that's not to say if someone showed up wearing like a denim bedazzled jacket, I imagine their friends would poke fun at them for dressing, in the style of 2001.
Yeah.
It's. I think being just a few years out of date is still very unfashionable.
You have to wait for it to come back again. Yeah. The cocked hat, though, I think is so far out of memory that I can't imagine it coming back exactly the same way.
It would be very hard for it to come back because it's not anywhere in living memory.
Right? It is in cultural memory, in images, but that has such specific associations.
But no one's going to say,
Princess Diana's came back as a fashion statement.
Right.
But that was a particular fashion statement.
But no one's going to reach into the closet and pull out a three-cornered hat and say, "Oh, I remember seeing old granddad wear this." It's a in the way that someone might with like a flat cap or
which is still hanging on quite strongly, I think. Yeah, you can still get them from historical hat.
They seem to be
makers.
Made in substantial quantities. It's not like trying to find a wide awake hat, which we found 2 suppliers.
Yeah.
You can get from pretty much any company that makes costumes a three-cornered hat. I think just because of there's as long as there's been film, there's been a gravitation towards the 18th century for setting movies in, because it is a very different style of clothing that very obviously says what period of time it is you're looking at on screen without having to do much more than put people in the right costume.
It'd be interesting to look at because it feels like it was pretty abruptly changed to the 19th century style with the sober colors and the sack coat and the top hat, or later a bowler, that slowly evolved into what's more common now, but not so dramatically, it feels like.
Well, and even the men's suit, it's sort of stayed the same in its. I mean, there have been minor adjustments to the cut, but I guess it was a suit beforehand. It was just the addition of long pants instead of tights with the short pants.
Yeah, but it's strongly in the cultural understanding. You see it, you know it's the hat that was worn at this time, and you have associations with it. And people make it for, I suppose, largely costume purposes.
Well, because there's a whole variety of things that you could be dressing yourself up as that took place in the 18th century, and they were all wearing a three-cornered hat, right? So whether you're dressing up like a soldier from that time period for reenactments, or as a pirate, or as nobility for some reason, if that's what you want to dress up as, you'd still be wearing this hat. So.
Well, let's rate the hat.
All right. Well, we can rate it. I was wondering if we wanted to, before we did that, if we wanted to talk about any of its cousins, like the bicorn.
Well, I think that could be another
that
program,
could be its own
don't
thing.
You think?
Yeah, because that's true. That's got a whole interesting history to how it was worn and the direction that you wore it in.
Yeah.
The tricorn, you can just kind of keep spinning it around. I mean, depending on how you fold it, it can have an obvious front and a back, but it doesn't need to.
No, I think it does have an obvious front and back. Oh, you're talking about the bicorn.
I guess the tricorne has an obvious front and back. Although which side is the back and which corner is the front corner doesn't
I
have
think
to be
it's
obvious.
probably clear when you put it on. But yes, it was on mine anyway. The tag was at the back, but
yeah. But yeah. So rate it for style and practicality.
yes, a hat that's still just hanging on. It's still made.
Right. It's not out of production like the Wide Awake.
Yeah, but you wouldn't find it on many people who are not consciously evoking the 18th century for some reason.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, we should mention as a practical note, if you get one, the size that you need of hat is going to change depending on whether you're wearing a wig.
Right. Because it may very well have been worn with a wig in costume.
Yes.
Oh, is the wig a hat?
Well, that's another question.
Oh.
It wouldn't have been considered a hat in the terms of if it's 1780 and you're buying a tricorne hat, you would not say, well, I've already got a hat, look at this wig.
Right, because you'd be putting a hat on your wig. But a wig is a thing you wear on your head.
Yeah.
We're going to have to explore this one further as well.
Certainly.
Good point. Yeah, if you're buying one, buy your wig first and then size it. I need a wig.
I've heard it's not that difficult to become certain kinds of judge.
This is true. If you live in one of the northeastern states, there's a very good chance that your small town or village elects its judges, and that there are not too many people running for that position. Just keep that in mind. Maybe you could wear a wig. Maybe that would confuse and alarm everyone in your court.
I don't think we're confused, though. I think they know that wigs are a judge accoutrement these days. But you don't have to as a United States judge, but I don't think there's any rule against it.
No, there is no rule against it.
Certainly, if someone thought that there was a law against it, seeing you, a judge, wearing one should convince them it is not against the law.
Very true. How could the judge break the law? It's not possible.
No. Well, let's rate the tricorne.
All right. So style. Very stylish.
I think so as well.
Incredibly stylish.
Now, we have to have the caveat that it's stylish within its time and place.
Right. It is not stylish now. You would be confusing people, causing them to at least question.
Maybe if you're a fan of the Patriots football team.
Right. That would be a perfectly appropriate place to wear it.
If you are going to Colonial Williamsburg.
Mm-hmm. If you are some kind of person who impersonates historical figures on the street for tips.
If you're going to some kind of conference appreciating something from the time of that 18th century, if you are going to a conference of
hat aficionados.
Oh, well, if you're going to a conference of people who love the work of Tobias Smollett, or if you're going to perhaps a Mozart festival, that's a little more...
That's true. Those happen a lot. Although people would still look at you in sort of a funny way, like, well, why have you come in costume to Mozart Festival? I was just wearing my jacket and tie.
Probably. Even there, it's outlandish. But if you're at Colonial Williamsburg, if you're fulfilling a ceremonial function...
Yeah.
If you're a reenactor,
it has enough modern uses, right? If you're in a
Yes.
movie, an extra in a movie,
right?
If you're in a play,
yeah.
So there are you get enough opportunities to wear one,
and it's a good looking
and
hat.
it looks good when you wear it.
Yes. There have been some worse looking varieties, but I think overall it's a good looking hat.
Outlandish, but if we're just talking your generic, average sized tricorne hat, not the. I think that we didn't talk about it, but I find that like the very tiny tricorne hats that women would wear on top of their very large wigs to be particularly outlandish and hilarious.
But I think in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah. And some of the men's ones would have very flowing colored fringe and enormous brightly colored feathers.
Yes.
And also outlandish.
But if you get the opportunity to wear one, you better wear it because you're going to look great.
Oh, yeah.
So style... In the context, like if you have a reason to wear one, and you are wearing it,
go play it to the hilt.
Yep, it's
shoot the works.
9.5.
All right, I was going to give it a 9, so we're very close here. Practicality, I'm a little bit lower. Yeah, it's often a large hat.
Yeah, it doesn't keep the. I mean, it keeps the sun out of directly in front of your eyes. I guess your musket, if you're carrying it, won't bump into the brim.
Yeah, and again, I don't carry a musket, but at the time this hat was introduced, the musket.
Yeah,
before the people it was introduced for, the musket was a concern.
Yeah, and something I had also heard is it was very easy when you came indoors and took your hat off to then put it under your arm and carry it around with you instead of it being floppy. So if you have nowhere to hang your hat in the place that you're going and need to carry it under your arm, it's practical in that way. It's felt and large, so it will keep the sun and rain off for the most part.
So I might put it at a 5. Maybe a 4.5.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with you on the 4.5. No, 5. We'll do a 5.
So the overall rating is a 7.
Not bad.
For the Tricorne hat. It's quite respectable for a
hat that you're almost
hat.
Never going to get to wear.
Yeah, yes. But I do have an affectionate place in my heart for the Tricorne hat.
It's the hat that got me into hats. You know, it's the... I remember thinking I want one, and then when I had one, I guess I was very young when I first got one, and my mom... It was just a very plain one, black with just the gold fringe around it that you get at Colonial Williamsburg. And
I think we had the same hat.
We must have. My mom sewed a silver button that we had that had fallen off of one of my grandfather's sweaters, and a feather and a big circular ribbon.
Oh, so you had a very nice.
It was decked out. It must be at my parents' house in the attic somewhere. I do have to find it.
I have to find mine as well. I last remember it being in the basement of my parents' house, which has since been very cleared out. But it must be somewhere around there. Yes.
So, Tricorne hat gets a 7. It's great. Wear one if you can.
Yes. And I'm going to sanction and give my benediction to the idea. There's no reason I can't give a benediction.
Well, yes. Charles approved.
Colloquially, give my benediction to anyone who attempts to bring back the Tricorne hat.
Go for it. Give me a call. I'll join you.
Yes, so will I. And send us a photo.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Of you, maybe wear it on public transport to work. See what kind of reactions you get.
Yeah, this is something that we haven't explored yet. We've asked people to email us, and people do contact us with mistakes we've made. But it would be nice also to get a picture of your favorite hat, of you wearing a hat in perhaps an unconventional setting, in a very conventional setting.
I think there would be something nice and odd and pleasant about a person dressed entirely conventionally on the subway, except for also the addition of a Tricorne hat.
Go for it. Do
Why
it.
not?
Let us know about it. And how could you contact us if you wanted to contact us, Charles?
Well, use the English language. We both speak it. And direct your inquiries and commentaries in email form to hatcast@yandex.com. That's HATCAST@YANDEX.com.
We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
My hat, it has 3 corners. 3 corners has my hat. And had it not 3 corners, it would not be my hat.